So this is another session on journal entries in private equity limited partners book. So in this session, we are going to cover the expenses part, not all, but different types of expenses, so that I'll walk you through what are the different types of expenses. And of course, your favorite one is accounting entries, means journal entries in the books of limited partners book. All right. If you haven't watched my first session on the same, like on capital call, you can go through it and please cover that as well. So because first session is interlinked with second, second will be again with third, fourth. So that's how you can also, go through it. All right. So yeah, and one more thing that I would like to tell you, I have recently launched one course on Udemy. If you want to enroll, you can enroll there and even get the certification from Udemy as well. So almost for 20 to 20 hours, content that I have published on platform. So if you are interested, go and check it. Thank you. So let's start with the session. All right. So I'll explain about the different types of expenses first. So if you see, if I take the example of private equity, as I said, it's a partnership business. And when we say partnership business, it means, see, when you add word partners or again business, so it means you would see expenses, it will come in picture automatically. Because without expenses, without spending, how will you generate revenue? Right? Without, see, understand this first, listen carefully. Without expenses or without spending, how will you generate revenue? All right. So if you want to generate revenue, so expenses are must. So it means expenses is nothing but which is all about the cost which has been incurred to generate revenue. All right. The cost which has been incurred to generate revenue. For example, let's say if I talk about expenses, let's say fund manager decided to buy bonds, right, from, let's say, JP Morgan broker or through JP Morgan broker. Of course, JP will charge commission or JP will charge fees or JP will charge transaction fees. All right. So if you see any expenses as such, so those would be your direct expenses. Why? Those are directly linked with the trading. And if any expenses or any such expenses, if you see directly interlinking with the trading part, so that becomes your direct expenses. That becomes your direct expenses. What about indirect expenses? Indirect, it means expenses which are not directly linked with the trading part. All right. Expenses which expenses which are not directly linked with trading or trading of securities or buying and selling of securities, so that becomes your indirect expenses. For example, let's say admin fees, right? Admin fees, promotion of funds, schemes, legal, right? Then your custodial fees, if you see anything as financial reporting fees, partnership expenses, other expenses, miscellaneous expenses. So that comes under your indirect expenses. Indirect, it means which are not directly linked. Indirect, it means not directly linked. Not directly linked with trading. Expenses which are directly linked with trading, that becomes your direct expenses, and that's what I said. Broker commission fees and transaction fees, that comes under direct expenses. So sometime that you can add in the buy value of trade or sell value of trade. All right. But indirect expenses, of course, you will have to record it separately because those are directly related to the operations, not the trading part. All right. Sometime you would see types, which is again another type is variable expenses. For example, let's say management fees. Management fees on AUM. AUM, it means asset under management. AUM basically total funds, which is, let's say, funds asset is 1 CR. So that becomes total AUM. But if you see investment or that invested amount which is linked with the securities like bonds, debentures, T-bills, and most of the instruments are tradable instruments. So it means you would see lots of fluctuations in AUM, asset under management, sometime up, sometime down, sometime no change. But how can we predict that fees, right? How can we predict that fees? And that's what you would see, management fees, incentive fees, that comes under your variable expenses. Even though broker commission, we cannot predict it because that would be based on the size of the your trade value. All right. Transaction, again, transaction expenses, that also comes under your variable expenses. You cannot fix it out. But sometime that happen. Let's say if you have purchased the prime package or VIP package of, or institutional package of XYZ institution, and if that institution already let's say negotiated with you on their fees and everything, in that case might be you would say fixed. But in most of the cases you would see those expenses comes under variable expenses. Then another type that you would see, fixed expenses. See, in a private equity, management fees also you can fix it. In private equity, management fees also you can fix it. But as I said, few expenses that you would see which is fixed, like admin fees, custodian fees, legal fees, financial reporting fees, management fees. So that you can see fixed one, and that's what you can consider them as a fixed. And you can, means in advance, see why we are discussing fixed one, I'll tell you. Variable expenses you can carry as a accrual expenses. So it means you know it, those are vary, but once it is incurred, you can record as a accrual. But what about fixed income? Fixed income you can already set up their bucket like 10 lakh, 15 lakh, 5 lakh, 2 lakh. So you will have two options. One, you can record them as a prepaid if the counterparty, let's say process or make a payment of those expenses in advance for a next accounting period, then you can consider that expenses or head as a prepaid expense, right? And in case of, let's say, if counterparty don't want to make a payment in advance, but the counterparty want to make a payment in payment as and when expenses incurred, or maybe annually or quarterly, in that case you can consider them as accrual expenses. So this is how you can carry fixed or variable expenses. Then again, the another term like important, which is fund level expenses. See, every fund registered as a legal entity. Legal entity, it means they register their IZIN, sometimes their QC, CIDOL, or different numbers on a reputed stock exchange, and that process would be like costly. Even though if you list your stocks, that process comes with cost, right? Comes with cost. It means lawyers or legal advisors, stock exchange, then government regulatory body who now issue that ISIN and all. So they'll charge their expenses, and that's what, if you see those expenses, you can treat as a fund level expenses, including legal, admin, brokerage, custodians, and all many more. Point here is only fund level expenses that you can record it in fund book only. Then what about partnership? In a private equity, you would see partnership level expenses as well. Let's say there are two partners, A and B. Sometime you would see, for example, let's say even tax. Someone is, A is paying 10%, another one is 15%. So you can book the the tax in the books of A and B as per their tax percentage. So you might see sometime here a discount on expenses as well. So my point here is, sometime you would see partnership level expenses, different expenses. So you cannot mix individual partners expenses in the books of partnership. So partnership, basically both limited partner and general partner, they come together and they form partnership, and they contribute their capital 10%, 20%. So those expenses, means on the basis of their capital, those expenses, it should be recorded in partnership level, not individual level, right? So in this case, you cannot record such expenses in partnership level, but yes, you can record such expenses in their individual book. All right. Organization level expenses. Organization, it means, for example, let's say AMC, ICICI Direct, who is managing, let's say, hundreds of funds. So point is, organization level, it means, let's say, organization appointed CEO, that AMC appointed new fund manager, or maybe they have appointed board of directors. So their salary you cannot directly debit it to the fund or partnership, basically, right? So of course you can charge your percentage, whatever percentage which was, let's say, agreed or signed, right? That percentage you can definitely charge to the partnership or maybe fund, but you cannot directly charge it as a like salary and other things. And that's what they directly charge, management fees, not as a individual that expense name for a particular purpose. All right. Then but yeah, so categorization is very important. So point here is organization expenses you cannot record it in partnership, and partnership expenses, of course sometime you would see that fund level expenses and partnership both would be same in private equity, you might see that. All right. And yes, partnership level expenses you cannot record it in individual book. For example, let's say partnership has received 100 rupees expenses, so you cannot record 100 rupees expenses in A book or even in B book. So you can record it as per their percentage. Let's say 50%, then you can split that 50 here and 50 in this book. So this is how you can record it. Of course, you can follow that method. All right. Next one is miscellaneous expenses. Miscellaneous, it means expense which are not categorized under above category. Then you can call it them as a miscellaneous expenses. The reason is the category is not available. All right. And then prepaid expenses, of course, prepaid and accrual expenses. Prepaid basically paid in advance. Paid in advance. Paid in advance expenses for a next accounting period before rendering service. Before rendering, it means, for example, let's say tuition fees. In most of the cases, we pay when students make a payment in advance for a next couple of months, right? Let's say you have a 6 month of tuition and fees is 60,000. Let's say batch starting time is January. So it means in January he will make payment 60,000 for next 60 months. So this becomes your prepaid expenses. Means before attending any session, he will make a payment of fees in advance to the classes or coaching. So same way, in a fund business, you would see sometime, admin fees, financial reporting fees, or maybe management fees, or any other expenses. If you see, investors or maybe fund will process in advance to the their counterparts. So those expenses you can record it as a prepaid expenses. But anyways, we'll have in detailed session on prepaid expenses, their challenges, recording, amortization, accounting entries and all. Right. So same in case of, if I talk about accrual. Accrual, it means basically accrual, say expenses which has been incurred, but that payment, so it means let's say students will make a payment at the end of the 6 month. So but throughout the 6 month, that professor can record fees every month, let's say for a 10,000. So they'll accrue it in the books of account and record it. Anyways, we'll have a in detail session on accrual expenses as well. So in short, I'll brief about accrual expenses you can treat as a liability, and prepaid expenses you can treat as an assets. All right. That's all about the types of expenses. Now I'll quickly walk you through one expense type at a time, not all, because session would be very lengthy and then you will not able to enjoy it. So what I'll do, I'll take one point which is expense, and I'll just discuss about it with the along with the accounting entry. So let's start. So our topic is, out of all this, so one point that I want to cover in this session, and next point I'll cover it in another sessions. So let's say if I talk about expense, as I said, expense, it means it's a spending, or you can say, in other words, you can say cost, right? When we say cost or spending, ultimately you would see there would be two movements. One which is cash will out or reduce. For example, let's say you have 1 lakh rupees in bank account. So you have purchased, or maybe let's say you have spent 20,000 tuition fees. You have spent 20,000 on 20 fees. So what would be your updated balance? Of course, 1 lakh. Sorry, not 1 lakh. Right, 75,000. Your updated balance would be 75,000. So it means, if you see, your expenses directly affect on cash balance or assets. So your assets, it means cash we treat as assets basically. So your assets will reduce if expenses goes high or if expenses increase. Now you may expect question, Like what if if expenses increase, then what will happen? See guys, the logic is very simple. If your expenses increases, then your NAV of the fund, it will down, decrease. Why this so? Come on. The reason is, I'll tell you. The expenses, it will eat the cash, from the balance sheet asset side, and ultimately, if the assets goes down, so it means NAV will go down, and that's what. If you see any question around it, whether this expenses will create impact on NAV or not, but I would say yes, your expenses will create impact on NAV, and that will eat your net assets value of the fund. All right. So let's say talk about cost, spending, or expenses. So here expenses, it means fund want to spend money on admin or any other expenses as such. You can say if the fund want to spend cash on it, so it means cash will out basically, and if cash will out from the fund, then this will create impact on net assets value of the fund. Okay, so your question would be like, sir, if I talk about, let's say, real examples, what are the different names that we would see as a cost or as a expenses in the books of fund? So you would see names like admin fees. Admin fees basically, Apex or Citco, they work as admin, and there are many more like Alter, Domus, uh, Line Data. There are many more, right? Thousands, more than 5,000 fund admins you would see in this industry. They charge admin fees for accounting, reporting, maybe let's say other services like depository services. It can be transfer agency services. It can be any other services as well. So you would see that. So basically, they charge fees, and their percentage. If you see their percentage or fixed, sometimes see they'll charge on the basis of fund size. I know few funds, they charge on the basis of fund size. Fund size, it means depends on the fund, like 1 CR, 2 CR, 10 CR, 20 CR, right? Or maybe let's say million, trillion, depends on the fund. And some funds, in spite or despite of that fund size, they directly charge fixed amount. Let's say fund size up to 1000 crore, they'll charge 10 CR. So this is how means cost will come, or they'll charge it. All right, so depends. And if I talk about fund size, so it means you would see percentage. If the fund size is, let's say, 1000 crore, then that fund admin will charge 1.5% or 1% value on total cash or total assets which is under management. So that depends on their packages and all. See, that is not a concern, but here you would see your admin fees or admin expenses, that also comes under your spending or cost or expenses. Apart from this, there would be many more: broker, then custodian, banks, legal counterparts, audit, right, financial reporting, or any consultative agency. If you see, if you a fund appointed, then that expenses also it will incur, and it will be paid out from the fund's pocket or bank balance. All right, so now I hope you got my point, like expenses, it means what exactly. So now I'll quickly I'll quickly record the accounting entry, means what if fund has any expenses incurred. Now I'll give a trick as well how you can record it. See, if you have expenses, there would be only two types. One is prepaid, another one is accrued expenses. One is prepaid, another one is accrued expenses. And apart from this, you might see direct as well. Sometimes, let's say it is not prepaid, or it is not even accrued, but directly as and when incurred, you can pay. For example, let's say movie ticket, you want to book the movie ticket, so you can quickly book it, so that becomes your direct expenses. Let's say fund manager, you are a personal secretary of your fund manager. Let's say fund manager asks you to book the flight ticket, and that wasn't in plan, so that becomes your direct expenses. Let's say penalty, we can't predict it, so we have violated some, let's say, rules, and now we have received penalty or fine notice, right? That becomes your direct expenses. And even trading related expenses as well, so that you can say it. So my point is, in a prepaid expense, you would see two things. One is cash cash involvement, and another one is expense involvement. Same here in direct expenses, you would see same thing. One is involvement of cash and expenses. And in case of accrued expenses, you would see involvement of expense and payable. Payable, it means basically liability, right? Yet to pay, or in short, liability, right? In short, liability. So now point is, so it means if you want to record expenses, as I said, there would be only the situations. For example, let's say fund manager paid admin fees. It's on this spot expenses. Let's say, assume it, admin fees. Your accounting entry would be, come on, admin fees, admin fees expense account debit to cash account credit. Why? Because in prepaid case, cash will out, and your prepaid expense, basically assets, always be recorded to the debit side. Follow this rule. Same in case of direct expense, cash will out, expenses we recorded to the debit side by default. In case of expense we recorded to the debit side, right? It will increase, and payable we recorded to the liabilities. It means always we record liabilities to the credit side. So this is how we prepare accounting entries: admin fees, expense account debit to cash in case of direct expense. So now I'll give you an assignment, so you try it, because in next session I'll cover those examples. For example, let's say fund has accrued fees. Fund has accrued fees of rupees, let's say 1200. So try to prepare accounting entry in the books of fund. Fund has accrued fees of 1200. And also one example I'll give it to you so that you can practice out. Let's say a fund has received prepaid expenses 1200 rupees for GMT fund A. So now prepare it. So now you know the expenses. Fund has received 1200 rupees as a prepaid expenses. Try to prepare accounting entries and post your answer in comment section. So that's how, see, my intention is like, I want to help you guys to understand all of this. I'll help you, don't worry about it, but I need commitment from you as well, so that you're practicing and you're doing also some sort of efforts, so that that will help you only, right? So you can try to post journal entries in the comment section. If not, at least explain what is or what are prepaid expenses or what are accrued expenses, right? I just want to check your understanding. But yeah, so I'm done with this session, expenses part session. So don't miss our next session. That would be on prepaid expenses. I'll explain in details, and then after again accrued expenses and all right? And meanwhile, you can share this content with others as well. Don't forget to click on bell icon, because you will receive notification, so that you can enjoy learning and all right? I'll take a leave now. We'll see you next session on different topic. Thank you. Meanwhile, you can watch first session as